Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Military forces in the West African country of Guinea have launched a coup, resulting in the dissolution of the government and the detention of President Alpha Conde. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have claimed a victory in Panjshir province, the last holdout of anti-Taliban forces, which would mean they have taken control of the entire country. Resistance forces, however, dispute the statement, saying they are continuing to fight. Meanwhile, two top U.S. officials are visiting the Middle East countries that received thousands of Afghan refugees. How will the Taliban solidify their leadership at home and win recognition abroad? What's America's plan on Afghanistan after the controversial withdrawal? And how will its Middle East allies play a part? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Science, and Muhammad Amir Rana, Director of the Pakistan Institute of Peace and Studies, and Professor Robert Kelly from Pusan National University. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, before our focus on Afghanistan, let's start with the Western nation Guinea. The coup d'état. What's the background? Why these elite forces now launching a coup d'état against the president?
Yeah, since this news came as a sudden. Further on, I got to know that the coming up with the reason that is the president that deposed one, Conde, he had fired that chief official coming from special forces. Yeah, this one actually has been upgraded, promoted by himself. But now in the recent 1 or 2 years, they had some quite a lot of dispute with each other. So he fired him first, even put him in jail. And then this chief of special forces, he had a lot of followers. His former, those soldiers, those special forces. So they came to even get him out from jail, and then they fight back. Now bring the president down. So this is kind of revenge for getting the power. So who is stronger? Whose fist is bigger than the other one?
It's more like a civil war, but in a much smaller scale, let's say. This nation is rich in mineral resources, and the situation, the coup d'état, obviously, had an impact on the global metal market. You see the prices going up very soon, quickly. So can we expect the situation, after, despite the coup, somehow will return to calm, return to peace and stability, despite the negotiation, the dissolution of the government institutions, arrest of the president, maybe somehow the situation will calm again?
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic about the stability in the very, soon, a very faster time, because those metal prices, in the market, actually they're coming from kind of prediction. Yeah, we also know when something happening like in Iran or Syria or whatever, Gulf region, and also you can see the rise of this oil price. So it's not coming from true. Coming from the real facts. So coming from prediction and some kind of
speculation,
speculation.
Yeah.
So actually when you see those 2 or 3 days in Guinea, now the situation are almost coming down. And these coup leaders, they have promised saying they will organize united government very soon, and we haven't seen very strong resistance coming from some army lawyer to the deposed president. So those things we haven't seen, because the former president, I don't think he got much support. He has been in power for such a long time, and also there's a lot of disputes, controversial about his third term, and also he changed the constitution, so on and so forth. So has already got a lot of resentment anyway.
So hopefully the situation will remain calm and also will come back to normal very soon. Well, let's get back to Afghanistan, and also we have Muhammad Rana on with us with the Skype. So Muhammad, obviously right now, today, there's this protest, hundreds of people in Kabul protested this, they call it the anti-Pakistan protest. So what is behind this demonstration there? obviously a technical reason somehow. So Wenping, obviously this, we know that they are close neighbors, Pakistan, Afghanistan. There were also a lot of reports, Pakistan enjoyed a strong relationship with Taliban. And now you see young people, in particular in Kabul, you see they are protesting. Somehow they call it like anti-Pakistan protest. So we don't know exactly the reason right now probably, but what do you think about this? How will it impact maybe the future stability of this nation or impact its relationship with Pakistan?
Yeah, we still don't know who is behind this rally, this protest, but there is some rumors going on saying India now is a country not happy at all because India used to give a heavy support to the former Afghanistan government. Yeah, they even send those army and weapons, not send army, send weapons actually. The media saying they're going to send army, but by the Indian media, but they sent weapons, that's for sure, to support the Afghanistan government. So of course, Taliban is not happy about India, and India now also those media meddling about this relation between Pakistan and with Taliban, or saying those two are together. So some even TV show give this idea very strong. So getting into those Afghanistan youth people's their minds. So now they come up saying Pakistan have to hands off about our domestic issue, but actually maybe those hands in not happening. So why you're talking about hands off? So give people an impression saying Pakistan now is hands in,
right.
Doing some meddling there, but this is also no facts.
That's it's like more like a speculation. There's a report in one of the Indian TV, basically using the video game pictures, saying that the Pakistanis are in the front line in the fight against Panjshir, the resistance force. Obviously, some people are not happy with that. Could be part of the reason. But anyway, hopefully the two neighbors, they can keep a good relationship. And, at this critical time, the situation in Kabul could calm down over there because you don't want to have more trouble for this nation. Speak of that, Taliban has said that, they have taken control of Panjshir, but the resistance forces obviously told a different story. So what do we know now? Or put it in another way, how important it is to have control of this region for the establishment of a new government?
Yeah, I think the reason Taliban has postponed the announcement of a new government is because the Panjshir, because the fighting is still going on. Yeah, I think because now the two different kinds of story. Coming from this side, saying we have fully control. Coming from that side, the resistance even saying they killed 450 Taliban soldiers. So even through some radio channel, the former Afghanistan president, Salih, also made some announcement.
You mean the vice president?
Yeah,
right?
The former vice president. So those news still needs some time to prove which one is a real one. So, but anyway, the importance is for Taliban, they have to resolve this issue before they make a new government. Because if those remaining of a Panjshir resistance group agree to surrender, and then they have to give some position for those Panjshir resistance group. So the new government cannot make announcement right now. So they're still waiting for surrender. I heard some even religious leaders now becoming negotiator, now back and forth, trying to pass this message. And then so they're still waiting for a very good, win all the heart, not only the military act, those, action. So that's the thing, maybe they are waiting.
Well, Mohammed, I also want you to take a look at this issue, the protest in Kabul. Since you are from Pakistan, you're familiar with the situation. Tell us, how much do you know about, why there's a protest? How will the protest somehow impact, will it impact the relationship between the two countries?
I think this is very unfortunate that the anti-Taliban protest has turned against the Pakistan. And we know that there were the anti-Pakistan sentiment somehow among the educated Afghan class, mainly those who are based in the urban centers. And they may have there's some logic behind, but this is happening at a time when there is a fighting going on in Panjshir, and Taliban had claimed the victory there. And there was a call from the resistance front that for the national-wide the protest against the Taliban. So this may have the context. And one important thing, I think, after the Taliban takeover, this is another narrative war has been started, and those who were the external player, those who were not happy with the developments in Afghanistan, and they are, I think, playing the some games there, and they are exploiting the certain tendencies against the Afghanistan neighbors, and somehow they have a very major role in the peace and stability of the country. So this is, I think, is not going to be in the longer term going to affect the relationship between the two nations. And gradually, as the peace will restore, we will see that the things will improve. Specifically, right now the Taliban are depending on its neighbors for the trade and for the formal recognition.
Well,
and I think
Mohammed, speaking of the neighbors, sorry to cut you off there. Speak of the neighbors, you see, the Taliban, at least, according to some, unclear, basically unnamed sources, they say Taliban is going to invite, basically 6 countries, representatives from the 6 countries to participate in the ceremony for the new government, including Pakistan, obviously Qatar, Turkey, Iran, China, Russia. Neighboring countries are very important, as you said. And what is the consideration behind this invitation?
I think the major motive is that the Taliban trust that these will be their major ally in future, and they are anticipating that at least these countries will remain directly or indirectly involved in the peace processes and remain engaged with the Taliban, either through the direct channels or the backdoor channels. And they are anticipating that the presence at that critical moment will give them not only the international legitimacy, but it will clear the intentions of the Taliban that which bloc they are going to prefer in future. It maybe seems like a diplomatic gimmick, but I think this is more important for the Afghanistan. On one side, the Taliban are facing the hard criticism from the Western Bloc, and in that context, they are mainly relying on the partners to whom they think they can play a major role in the stability of Afghanistan. At the same time, they have the stakes in stability and peace within the Afghanistan. Apparently, these seems the motives.
Well, Wenping, obviously, the international community, including, actually, we mentioned the 6 countries, as well as like Western countries, the U.S., European countries, they all say or expect there would be an inclusive government to be set up by the Taliban. Now, here is a question, like how inclusive is inclusive? Is there any specific standard here?
Well, if, of course, there's no clear the standard, but obviously, if all those ministers, all those positions has been occupied by Taliban itself, definitely is not inclusive. So you have to unite others. And also there are different tribes, like in Afghanistan, the Tajik people, the Pashto people. So if you only Pashto people sitting in all those key positions, that's not inclusive. And also the gender balance. You cannot be all the men sitting there. And then you should have include women. So how to prove you guarantee the women's rights? So you have to at least, they are saying they will keep like 2 positions for women, to in charge of health, in charge of education. So we hope that will be true. So also this Panjshir resistance group, we just mentioned, if they can be included in, if they surrender, okay, this is a good ending. So they also want some position because they represent the Tajik, this tribal, those group. So this is the inclusive. And also some people saying, maybe should include some former Afghanistan governments, those members, Like before, I heard different opinion. Some are saying, different resources saying, one resource saying Taliban now has saying no chance for all those former Afghanistan government, those members, no single chance. And then another resource is saying, oh, they have to keep some position for the former to see this is a reconciliation already there. So this, I think, this is basic the standard.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Let me bring in Professor Robert Kelly from Pusan National University. So, Robert, do you see, right now the Taliban, they are working genuinely to set up a inclusive, a broad-based government?
I think it's wise for the Taliban to do that at the moment, right? I mean, the last time the Taliban governed really badly, it brought a great deal of international isolation, and then of course with the penetration of Al-Qaeda, you got the American response to the invasion, right? So it makes sense strategically as long as there's so much light on Afghanistan, right? Everybody's paying attention. It's in the Western media, right? The world opinion is sort of looking at it. It makes sense for the Taliban to sort of start off slow, and then as Afghanistan sort of slips away from the newspapers and everything else, the holidays are coming up and stuff like that, and other things will happen in the world, and people will start to forget in time as long as the Taliban isn't too outrageous. And then the real test, I think, is in like 6 months or a year when we're not talking about this anymore. Will the Taliban tighten the screws?
Mm-hmm. If you look at, of course, the international response will be largely based on, whether there's an inclusive government, broad-based there. But also right now, seems there's a humanitarian crisis. Winter is approaching rapidly, things like that. So right now, the U.S. has frozen almost 9.5 billion in assets belonging to the Central Bank of Afghanistan. Taliban has no access. And the International Monetary Fund blocked Afghanistan the access of 460 million in emergency reserve. The World Bank also halted funding to Afghanistan. So some humanitarian groups and others are calling for the freeze to be lifted to help the nation. Either is about economic reconstruction or about the humanitarian situation to relieve that situation. What do you say? Do you think it's a time probably to engage and help with those lifting those bans?
I wouldn't do that at the moment because the bans are the best leverage we have that the Taliban don't return to medieval barbarism like they did in the late 1990s, right? And we should try to sort of hold the Taliban to their sort of commitment to be inclusive, as you say, right? Money is our best leverage, right? It's also pretty clear that in the 20 years that the United States was providing an enormous amount of assistance to Afghanistan, a lot of it disappeared into the hands of warlords and drug dealers and heroin gangs and things like that. So it's not even clear to me that if this money was freed up, it would actually go into development, like building schools and latrines and things like that. I mean, there's no particular reason to trust the Taliban would actually spend that money responsibly. Certainly Afghanistan doesn't have a record of doing so. So I would wait, right? I mean, we have to wait and see how the Taliban behave, right? And I would argue that the most important marker actually would be its treatment of women and girls, right? I mean, does it really sort of go down a very strict path? And then in 6 months or something like that, if the Taliban are actually still doing what they're saying now, then we can think about engagement. But I would argue the financial leverage is our best effort at the moment.
But there are other argument, Robert. Like obviously Taliban is a conservative force. They will not treat
Sure.
women as in the previous government, more secular way. To what way it is acceptable to say the U.S. or the European nations? I mean, some people would say if women or the treatment of women is a criteria, is a standard. The people probably will rethink their relationship with Saudi Arabia, or they will do something against the U.S. state of Texas.
Oh yeah, well the abortion, yeah,
And the abortion law, right?
yeah. Look, I have no problem if the United States actually loosens its relationship with Saudi Arabia. Actually, I mean, I actually think that a lot of the countries the United States has relationships with in the Middle East. I mean, this is actually important stuff. We shouldn't act as an American. My own personal belief is that we should actually have looser relationship with a lot of the sort of harsh regimes in the region, and Saudi Arabia is one of them. And I would certainly agree that the Texas thing with I mean, it's complicated, right? But there's an obvious constitutional issue there. But I mean, look, I mean, we can't sort of like force the rest of the world to sort of have our beliefs about the treatment of women and girls. But I mean, these are important issues, right? I mean, there's no particular reason why we have to give the Taliban money. right? I mean, if we want to give them that, we should make that conditional on some things. And some of that should be liberal treatment of dissidents, right? Women and girls, as you say, homosexuals, other, non-Muslim populations. I mean, there are all kinds of things that we want the Taliban to do, and I don't see any particular reason why we owe them money, right? I mean, the most important thing the Taliban can do is govern well, right? Giving them aid can help them govern well, but it won't actually reverse terrible choices, right? And so we need to sort of incentivize the Taliban to actually take governance seriously, which of course they didn't in the 1990s. So, yeah.
Well, given 1/3 of the country's population, sometimes they're not sure what's the next meal come from, because of humanitarian crisis. I'm just curious, whether treatment of women will be the standard somehow to hold out this assistance. But anyway, Saudi Arabia is making progress, very impressive progress in terms of their women's rights protection. But let's move on. The U.S. Policy toward the future Afghanistan, let's say. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is on his way to the Middle East to visit Qatar and Germany. So tell us, what's his purpose?
Well, I think now the real issue is to sort of dampen down the anxiety that the withdrawal provoked in Europe, right? Particularly if you read the British media, there was a lot of sort of, I would say, hyperbole, really sort of hysteria that the American retrenchment from Afghanistan meant that somehow the United States was ceding the field to authoritarianism or something like that. NATO was suddenly in question, that America wasn't listening to its allies, that U.S. defense guarantees were up in the air. I actually don't think a lot of that discourse is accurate. And where I am here in Korea and East Asia, I don't think you really saw that very much, right? The press in Japan and Korea and Taiwan didn't go sort of ballistic over Afghanistan the way the Western European press did. But I think that's a lot of it. And then also for the Middle East, right? I mean, there's the issue of sort of Afghan refugees, right? And trying to get sort of Muslim countries to talk to the Taliban to sort of do what we were saying before, sort of govern better so that you don't have these, sort of internal implosion and then an exodus, right? And the Muslim countries are much better positioned to talk to the Taliban than we are, right? I mean, that was ultimately one of our big problems, right? Was the major cultural difference between the West and Afghanistan. Afghan elites just didn't really trust us very much. We were very much outsiders. So hopefully we can talk to Pakistan and Gulf states, and they can actually talk to the Taliban. Maybe we can get some better movement.
Mm-hmm. So, Robert, do you think, what do you think about the U.S. Policy toward the Taliban-led government? We know that obviously in terms of the anti-terror efforts, obviously there's a need of cooperation from Taliban in terms of providing information on the ground, for example, even use different measures against those ISIS-K, for example. So U.S. will continue to engage with Taliban. This probably will take a longer time to recognize the government.
Yeah, well, recognition is going to take a while, right? I mean, the United States didn't really sort of figure out how to deal with that with Vietnam, for example, for about 15 years after that conflict, right? But I would imagine, I mean, my own counsel would be that, yes, the United States should eventually move towards recognition of the Taliban government. I mean, they won, right? I mean, they won the conflict. And it's important to note also that one of the reasons why they won is because a fair number of Afghans wanted them to win, right? I mean, they would not have won if they didn't have a fair amount of support out there, at least among the warlords in the villages, and again, sort of among the more unsavory groups, the gangs and the drug dealers and whatnot. But I mean, that is sort of Afghanistan's elite, and they recruited those people. They networked with them quite well, which is why the Afghan state fell apart so rapidly, right? So there's some legitimacy for the Taliban, and we should, in fact, talk with them. But that doesn't mean that the United States has to come forward with an aid package, right? I mean, if foreigners want to give aid, the Chinese can do it, right? There's no particular reason why the United States is obliged to pay for the Taliban until we know that they're going to behave better. But I would not recommend diplomatic cessation. I don't see any particular reason for that. I mean, the war's over.
Mm-hmm. Wenping, what do you see? International recognition obviously is important to whatever new government in Afghanistan, because they need obviously international aid, international investment, cooperation from financial institutions like World Bank, IMF, etc. So, do you expect any recognition or closer engagement from Europe, from the US anytime soon?
I don't think the US and the European countries will do very quick move, saying to recognize Taliban, as our American colleagues just mentioned. They still want to use not only this money as a leverage, and also this recognition also as a leverage to hold there, to watch next move of Taliban. But Taliban, they doesn't need to worry too much. you see those invitation goes to who?
Right.
Goes to all those neighboring countries.
Yes.
And Turkey now has already promised, saying we are going to recognize you, very soon, because they are going to take over the airport. So Turkey, and then they count on all those other countries neighboring, they send the invitation. So this is the wish. So they not wish that much, saying those recognition come that soon from like United States, but they also have their leverage in Taliban's hands. That is anti-terror. U.S. needs the cooperation come from Taliban to anti-terror. So this is bargain chips. So you give me recognition, you just frozen all those money, and then we can cooperate.
Right. At least there will be a close engagement, if not, complete recognition. Also, Robert, there's, Blinken's trip is overlapping with the Defense Secretary Austin, who is on a wider Gulf visit, covering actually several countries: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. So they all went to this the Middle East region, but it seems with different missions here.
One would imagine that the overarching mission is to sort of hold up the American framework in the Middle East after the Afghan withdrawal, right? I mean, the Afghan withdrawal signals, I think, pretty clearly that the United States is overextended in the Middle East, right? And I think we realize that in Iraq as well. But the United States still has a lot of allies that are important to it. A lot of this is sort of for ideological reasons, right? Because countries like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are actually drifting towards Israel, which is ideologically very important to a large chunk of American voters. Right? But generally, I mean, you can argue that the war on terrorism is starting to wind down, and American forces will probably begin to sort of shrink in the region, right? There's a much bigger focus in the United States on China right now. Certainly, the Biden administration has sort of argued that we should be moving away from the Middle East towards China, and that sort of lack of focus on the Middle East might be sort of unsettling to traditional Gulf elites that have been close to the United States. You mentioned the Saudis particularly, right? And so that's probably what that is. It's reassurance in the short term. But I mean, the long-term trend probably is going to be a slow and steady American drift away from the Middle East, given the importance of China and the fact that the war on terrorism is kind of over, right? I mean, it turned out to be a stalemate. We didn't really do it very well. It kind of was a mess, and most Americans just don't want it anymore. And that's what Afghanistan. That's the big signal of Afghanistan, that this is winding down.
Well, Robert, you say the anti-terror war is over, but the ISIS-K probably they would say this is not over against the Americans.
Sure, that's right. And so, but I mean, there will always be terrorism, right? I mean, that's a given, right? The real question is whether or not you're going to see something like 9/11 ever again, right? Will there be large, organized international terrorist groups, particularly Muslim fundamentalist groups, that can actually launch mega terror events like 9/11? And one of the lessons that we've learned now on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 is that it was not, in fact, the beginning of some massive campaign against Western cities, but actually that was a one-off. It was sort of a sucker punch. The Americans weren't paying attention, and Al-Qaeda was able to slip in and do this major operation. But that's never happened again, right? I mean, terrorism has increasingly gone from being a military issue to being sort of a diplomatic and policing issue, which is to say that the Americans can probably contain most of the current terrorism threat without a massive military presence in the Middle East, right? I mean, that to me is the big lesson of Iraq and Afghanistan. We went into the Middle East, we turned the place upside down, we killed a huge number of people, we disrupted all these governments, and what did we get for it? I mean, it's not clear to me that all that was really necessary to decapitate Al-Qaeda, which we did with a special forces operation, right? So that's what I mean when I said the war on terrorism, right? There will always be counterterrorism, but the big, heavy footprint American engagement, that part is probably over. I mean, Biden himself said that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wenping, we have less than 1 minute to go. Obviously, despite the strategic competition between China and the U.S., obviously both countries are against terror, and they have common interest in stability and a peaceful Afghanistan for both nations. Is there room for them to cooperate with each other?
Yeah, of course. I think, like you just mentioned, we have those consensus to maintain a peaceful and secure and also development. This is Afghanistan. We don't want to see troublemaking place and terrorist activity there. But we care more, I think, compared with U.S. Right. Because like American colleagues just mentioned, U.S. seems now large-scale, this anti-terror war is over,
that's
they
right.
think.
Obviously, we need cooperation. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Wenping. On that note, we are coming to the end of today's show. Thank you for watching. See you next time.